Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on the Ben Boeke Arena and Dempsey Anderson Arena. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call of assembly members.
Okay, Miss Allard.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Mrs. Grant. Here. Mr. Presberdia. Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
I get that here.
And Ms. Zolotel.
Here.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. As usual for assembly members, if you want to get in the queue, either put yourself in the chat or if you can't access the chat, please text me. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on a Monday. I know Monday at noon isn't a usual work session time for us, but several community members raised an issue with us, and so thanks to the assembly members who requested this work session to address some of those issues. So we're going to go ahead and start with some remarks from the administration. I believe Jason Bockenstead is going to be providing some remarks, and then we'll move on from there to Kirk from the Anchorage Hockey Association, then a representative from the figure skating community, then we'll hear from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and then I think from there we'll turn it over to open discussion and dialogue. So I'll start with you, Mr. Bockenstead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I believe that Mr. Schutte is also on the line. So if I, in my brief remarks to kick things off, say anything that, or he wants to add anything, I think he'll hop in as well. Certainly, I know we're here to discuss kind of the Ben Boeke and what that looks like in terms of using it for congregate sheltering of houseless individuals. Over the last, I'd say, week or 10 days, the EOC, the administration, and others have spent a lot of time looking at all of the different options that we have to provide the necessary shelter for those experiencing homelessness. I think, as everyone is very well aware, over the last couple of weeks, we've been reaching the capacity at the Sullivan Arena, which has been very concerning to us, especially as we really start to get into the fall and winter season. So I know that there was there's been a lot of work that has been put in over the last 7 to 10 days to kind of identify additional ways to provide that shelter through a variety of different ways to hopefully relieve some of the pressure at the Sullivan Arena. And I believe that likely, I know over the weekend, there was an email that was sent out by Mr. Schutte to a lot of the folks in the hockey world within Anchorage, letting them know that the EOC and the administration have made the decision that we don't believe we will need the Ben Boeke, so that we are going to pull that arena off the table and get back on track with putting ice into the arena. I know that was paused for a little while. I believe that they have started this morning putting ice back into the arena. And then just quickly, I'll touch on where we think we can go and why we made this decision. So I think, as again, all of the assembly members know, but for those that are listening on, during the discussion, debate, and approval of the larger CARES Act package from a couple of weeks ago, the Assembly, through an amendment, added an additional $1 million for rapid rehousing of individuals. To hopefully, I think, whoever offered it, I think it was Meg, I think had the foresight to see the issues that we're developing with the Sullivan reaching capacity. So we believe that through that, we are working feverishly with the coalition, the different providers, but we believe that over the course of the next couple of weeks and months, we will be able to move quite a few of the folks that are likely staying at either the Sullivan or a number of the other shelters around town into rapid rehousing and provide additional capacity there. We are also certainly looking at the properties that we have been authorized to purchase. We are certainly looking at moving that process as quickly as we can in a responsible way, so that if not by the end of this year, early next year, we will have additional capacity through that. And then certainly looking at additional hotels for space as needed. So all of that put together has given us a level of confidence that we don't think we will need the Ben Boeke. So we have released it to put ice back in and allow it for hockey activity. So that's about all I'll have to say right now. Certainly happy to answer questions as we go through the next hour or so, but then I will also invite Chris, if I missed anything, to jump in and say a few words as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Bockenstead. Thank you, Mr. Schutte. So, yeah, I guess we have enough time. We'll go ahead and do questions now before we get to the Hockey Association and the others who are going to speak today. So I have first Mr. Dunbar, then Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two pretty simple questions. I think that I suspect that the Hockey Association will be asking this too, but perhaps so the information was in the email that I don't believe the Assembly members have seen. But my first question for Mr. Schutte or whomever at the administration could answer it is, how long will it take to return the Ben Boeke to its status as an ice rink? And then my question for Mr. Bockenstead, and you're correct, it was Ms. Zolotel through her foresight that put forward that amendment, I believe, and it certainly will be helpful. That $1 million, how far does it go? How many folks does it potentially house, and for how long? And I guess what do we think happens after that money is gone?
Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblymember Dunbar, Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. I'll handle the ICE question first. So as the Assembly recalls, the Ben Boeke Ice Arena is technically two rinks, two sides. And so one side is already frozen and painted, et cetera, and open for use already. In fact, I believe some of the figure skating user groups have already booked time in the facility beginning today. So I think there will be people in there today if they aren't already this morning. And then rink one, which is not frozen yet, it was fired up. The ice plant was fired up this morning. It will be available for use in skating the day after the sorry, I get the holidays confused. Is it Labor Day? That's the next holiday, Labor Day. And I'll let Mr. Bockenstedt answer your question about rapid rehousing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Through the chair, Assemblymember Dunbar. We believe that the $1 million at a minimum will be able to rapidly rehouse about 200 individuals. And that would include providing kind of the ongoing case management necessary to make sure that they're successful, and preventing new homelessness from those individuals or relapsing into homelessness for up to a year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Allard.
Thank you. Chair, I have a couple of one question for the administration, and then I have a couple for the hockey community, if that's okay with you. So my first
sure.
question, okay, thank you. I'm sorry. My first question would go to, I guess it would be Mr. Schutte. Mr. Schutte, do you know when the hockey community can enter into a contract so that everything's set up and online?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Allard, are you referring to booking ICE through the ICE allocation?
Yes, and be able
okay.
to use the facilities. Yes, please.
Yeah, good question. So the ICE allocation work was underway prior to the pause on Boeke. With the pause on Boeke, we started looking at what an allocation policy could look like and function, or how it would function if Boeke was not included. Now, as of Friday, Boeke's back in the mix, so we're picking up our work on the ICE allocation across all facilities. I would expect that to be done by the end of this week.
Excellent. And then, Chair, if it's okay with you, can I just ask the hockey community just a couple of quick questions? I'm sure they probably know the answers pretty readily.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, ask those questions, and then I'll ask Mr. Kohlberg to give his remarks and then answer your questions.
Oh, okay. I just had a question of how many kids, Kirk, is this going to open the doors to get back on the ice? How many kids is this affecting? And I just also want to thank the administration for doing this. Can you talk to that, Kirk? And then I guess that's be it. I didn't realize he was going to go ahead and speak, so I apologize.
Go ahead, Mr. Kohlberg.
Mr. Chair, I was in the queue.
Sure, Mr. Constant. Is your question for the administration?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
I think I heard Ms. Allard ask a slightly different question, and it's a question that I would like us to be looking at to consider. Not so much the question of how quickly can we get under contract to allow ice time this season, but there's certainly a conversation that's happened in the past and could happen in the future about coming up with an alternative management structure for the ice time that isn't led by the Muni, but is instead led by an association between the hockey and the ice skating people. And so has the administration done any work to further down that road, or is it something that you're open to contemplating? Which effectively, to simplify it, is to let them manage it under a contract.
I'm not sure who that's for, but through the chair, Assemblymember Constant, if you're asking specifically about whether or not a private nonprofit, if the Hockey Association established a private nonprofit, could they manage the rinks? And the short answer is probably, but it would go through the normal competitive procurement process that we're required to follow per municipal code. And any entity at that point, whether it's a nonprofit organized by the hockey associations or some of the national organizations like ASM Global, who currently manages the facility, anybody could submit a bid on that management opportunity.
Quick follow-up. It would be possible, though, to structure the request so that it narrowly targeted operations by user groups, wouldn't it? I mean, it wouldn't have to be so broadly written that SMG could run it.
So through the chair, the requests for bids are never tailored specific to a particular entity. They're focused on outcomes. So I'm not entirely clear how I can answer your question, except to say that I think the bid would be specific to management of the facility and the outcomes expected from that facility, but would not predetermine whether it had to be a user group led effort or open to anyone to bid on?
I think there's some real flexibility and targeting that could be done that wouldn't predispose, but at the same time could narrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So before I turn it over to Mr. Kohlberg, were there any other questions for the administration? Okay, not seeing any then. Go ahead, Mr. Kohlberg. So if you can go ahead, give your remarks, and then I think if you could answer Ms. Allard's question as well.
Hello, members of the Assembly, administration, and the community. We really appreciate the chance to come and talk. Please excuse any formalities. This is our first time. My name is Kurt Kohlberg, and I also have Justin Markham here to represent the hockey community. I wanted to say thank you for holding this work session and allowing us to be a part of it. We really appreciated last week Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Constant, and Ms. Aldrich coming out and talking to us. That really meant a lot. We also want to thank the EOC administration for the recent decision to return Ben Boeke back to community for its intended use. To answer Ms. Aller's question, the thing we're most excited about is that we're going to have over 4,000 kids, participating in over 500 hours, with those rinks back to their status. So, which is a huge improvement for their physical activity, socialization, and definitely helps out with their mental state during this trying time. Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. And I would just like to kind of re-emphasize, thanking the administration and the EOC for taking Ben Boeke off the table, at least as of now. I'd like to, kind of make a statement with regards to how important that is to not only the youth hockey community, but the adult hockey community, the figure skaters. And so with that, I kind of have a quick statement, a little bit of historical background about myself. I'm a longtime Anchorage resident, pretty much all that I can remember. I grew up in Anchorage playing hockey for both the Alaska All-Stars and the Anchorage Hockey Associations. I played 4 years of high school hockey in my time at Service High School. I attended Michigan Technological University, returning to my home in Anchorage every summer, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering in 2000. I decided to return home after graduation and immediately began working for a local engineering firm that I have been with for over 20 years now. Because of my passion for hockey, I not only continued to play in the Ben Boeke Adult League, but also wanted to give back to the game, so I began coaching as well. In addition to coaching the last 20 years in multiple organizations, I have also taken on a larger administrative role with the Alaska All-Stars, including president for the last 5 years. And as kind of Chris alluded to a little bit there, I've been involved with some of the ice allocation discussions that began earlier in 2019. With the return and the decision late last week, this has allowed facility management, as Chris indicated, ASM Global, to move forward with putting ice back in and getting it prepared for the intended purpose of being a recreational hockey and skating arena. I have spent a lot of time over my lifetime in the rinks as both a player and a coach. As a youth player, this time at the rink not only kept me active, but it also kept me socially engaged and out of trouble. I learned a lot of life lessons, including discipline, how to work within a team, respect for others, accountability, and dealing with adversity. As a dad now of 2 hockey players and a coach of multiple teams, I still spend a lot of time at the rink. This provides me the opportunity to mold the character development of these young athletes and pass on the life lessons that I learned through sport. In the current state of things, with the enormous amount of screen time that our youth are subjected to currently with online school, video games, cell phones, I believe it is even more critical now not to potentially eliminate these athletic opportunities for our youth. Thank you for your time. Kirk, do you have anything?
Again, I just want to say thank you very much for the decision, and we appreciate the quick communication from Mr. Schutte. His email was very detailed and very, very specific, and he got it to us as soon as he possibly could. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much. Before we turn it over to the figure skating groups, we'll go ahead and see if there are any questions, starting with Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I'm not sure who was just speaking exactly. I had the opportunity to meet with Kirk, the director of the association, last week, and was really grateful. And the event was in two parts for me. The first part was amazing with all those kids out there and a lot of positivity. And then the second part, of course, was a lot less civil. And I just wanted to note that I had not been cussed out by a 10-year-old since probably I was 10 years old until last week. And I'm really grateful to hear you speak about your efforts to teach sportsmanship, sportswomanship, and how to be a good member of a community, because we all need better lessons on that in these trying times. So I just wanted to say thank you for the first part, and that was really helpful for me to see you all out there in force. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the Anchorage Hockey Association? And I guess just to clarify for the record, Mr. Kohlberg, who was the other individual speaking?
That was Justin Markham.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments for the Hockey Association. We'll go ahead and turn it over to any representatives from, I guess, Miss Allard, your hand has been up this whole time. Did you have another question for the Hockey Association? Just to confirm.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'll put my hand down.
Oh, okay, thanks. All right, so not seeing any other questions. We'll go ahead and turn it over to the figure skating organizations. Is there anyone who can speak from those organizations? And if a representative from those organizations is on one of those phone numbers, then the way to unmute yourself is *6 if you're on one of those phone numbers. Okay, and then I also want to note for the record that we've been joined by Miss Quinn Davidson. Okay, Miss Allard, your hand's back up, so I assume you have something for us.
Yeah, I do. And since we're going to be moving on to the figure skaters, I wanted to thank the hockey community. I think that they use their right to assemble and to come out and rally and show their kids what it means to come out and take a stand on some certain issues. I also wanted to say I saw all over social media that you guys are doing some sort of care package. Can you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Yes, Ms. Allard, what we established is we wanted to get to work on this as quickly as possible. So they're called blessing bags, and some of our young players, 8 and under players, are going to be collecting items outside of Boeke on Wednesday from 5 to 8. These are items that have been identified to us that could be either essential or good for quick transitions, such as water bottles, granola bars, some toiletry items, all in a 1-gallon Ziploc bag. So we've encouraged anybody to come down and help support us by dropping off any of those items. They don't need to be all in one bag. They can be separate. We can assemble them separately.
Awesome. I just wanted to say thank you for giving back to the community. It's appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up one more time to any of the figure skating organizations, if they had a representative who wanted to speak. And then I'll go to you, Mr. Dunbar. I'm just going to give it another second. Okay, not hearing anyone. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I'll ask you first. Is the Coalition to End Homelessness going to speak next, or should I ask them a question directly?
They are speaking next.
Okay, then I'll wait to ask a question of them afterwards. I did want to ask Kirk about we had spoken when you, me, and Chris had spoken. You were mentioning how USA Hockey has very specific time frames, and that a delay in the season would be very disruptive. And I'm curious if, given the administration's fast action on this, if you guys are going to be able to meet all your timelines.
Yes, Mr. Dunbar. Right now, with how quickly this is turned around, we should be back on track with anything, no delays. And I think we are referring to is specifically national bound tournaments that are set by USA Hockey and the requirements that are necessary to be met to compete in those tournaments.
Great. Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of sad that the folks from the figure skating group didn't get into the queue here. Maybe they're listening, maybe they're not, but I just wanted to make sure that they were represented because they are one of the key constituencies in ICE allocations across the community. So I'm glad that we made time for them. I'm sorry they couldn't be here.
Thank you. All right, so next we have Jasmine Boyle with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness.
Chair, before we go forward, this is Ms. Allard. Can I please call on Bernadette Wilson? She is here from the Figure Skating Association.
Oh, sure, yeah. If Ms. Wilson would like to speak, go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I didn't speak up the first time thinking that the bulk of these questions had been answered. But I do have one question. So I grew up figure skating here in Anchorage and I now coach. But I do have one question regarding, you guys brought up the fact that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. So this contract for who manages the rink, if the hockeys and the figure skating groups get together and create a nonprofit that, just like any other nonprofit or, quite frankly, for that matter, for-profit entity, can go through the competitive bid process. Can someone give guidance there under the situation if you have, for example, if you have the current management company and it appears to those that are using the rink, to the users, that there is some fault to be found with how these rinks are getting managed? How do we address those issues if the municipality has a contract with this group, but this group is failing to maintain or operate in a way that the users see satisfactory? What are the repercussions? Or can someone just give me, I have no idea there, can someone give me guidance on how we should address that?
Thank you. Through the chair. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. To the caller, this is Chris Schutte with the Department of Economic and Community Development. So we regularly have communications by user groups and sometimes by specific teams and or parents about management of any of the public facilities, whether we're talking ice rinks or convention centers, et cetera. And it always open to comment and concerns from the community, especially since as the owner of the facility and the owner of the management agreement, we are in a position to help fix or correct any problems or issues or errors. And so I would just suggest that your user group as well, we have an open door and you can reach out anytime.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jasmine Boyle with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. Ms. Boyle.
Thank you to the chair and to the full assembly for inviting me to share some thoughts today. I think that we've had a wonderful conversation already in the last 30 minutes, and I applaud the parents and certainly the young people who came out to engage in public process. I think on behalf of our vulnerable who are experiencing homelessness, I will always be the first to say it's not one or the other. I certainly never intend to say we need to prioritize our vulnerable more than our youth, their families, and the health and well-being of our community. particularly during a pandemic where I think everybody is frightened and on edge for a variety of issues. I'm mostly here to answer questions for folks. I think that we're certainly getting data points in the last 2 weeks about the number of people experiencing homelessness coming back with positive COVID testing. And so what I'll certainly share on behalf of, again, our vulnerable and our providers who do this work is we do need to think long and hard about shelter capacity. That was a winter issue prior to COVID. And I certainly have said to you all a number of times that I have every reason to believe we're going to see homelessness increase due to COVID. And a different type of homelessness, not the folks that we see out on the streets, but my neighbors and yours, the 11,000 jobs that will be lost this year in Anchorage, the folks that can't pay for childcare and can't adapt to the new schooling system. Those are the folks that we're going to see entering into homelessness. I think with the Axe Cares budget discussions that have unfolded this month, the two beacons of light that I see from my line of sight, which again is primarily focused on people experiencing homelessness, is the prevention opportunity we have when it comes to the money that the Assembly set aside for rental and mortgage assistance. As those funds are getting out into the community in partnership with AHFC, who's managing the state funds, I think preventing that new homelessness is priority number one. If we can help people stay where they are, if we can help them make it work and get connected to employment and stabilize, I think that is the first and biggest win for all of us. Again, in regards to homelessness and COVID, I think the second piece of that is if we can't catch a household before they fall into this new homelessness, how do we circle the wagons and get them reconnected as quickly as possible? And for me, I think that the opportunity there is that money that we have set aside through the Assembly for rapid rehousing, particularly if we're able to focus that money for people that are currently staying in Sullivan. So if we can decompress the big shelter by getting those folks into apartments as quickly as possible, I think that's a win for our landlords. It's certainly a win for those folks, and it's a win for the larger community if we can create space in the shelter. I will also say we know that our campers come in the winter. We know that we have significantly less unsheltered people outside. So as the weather changes, I do expect we'll see a small uptick of those individuals needing shelter. And then, of course, we need separate space for isolation and quarantine because of course, all of the complexities of COVID. I certainly don't think the ice rink is the only option. I think that as someone who spent 20 years doing child welfare, I'll be the first to say that healthy pro-social activities to engage our young people are one of the best ways that we prevent future problems. Certainly future homelessness for our at-risk kids, for sure. There is very solid data. So I'm here to answer questions, but I certainly just defer to the administration and the Assembly as to what is the most appropriate location to look at doing isolation and quarantine capacity if, of course, the ice rinks aren't going to work for the larger community.
Thank you. So if members have any questions for Jasmine, please get in the queue. I'll start with Ms. Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question for Jasmine and the coalition is, as we look toward winter and moving forward, could you remind us of what the rapid rehousing gap was from the gap analysis, and if you have any recommendations, if we'll need to consider additional funding for rapid rehousing this year in 2020? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Assemblymember Zalatel. I will pull up that data while we're talking, but frankly, I'm not looking at our existing rapid rehousing gap. I think that we had a gap that existed long before COVID. What I'm really looking at right now with the most urgency is rapidly rehousing new homeless individuals. And I say that in a very careful and regulated way because we are not failing to be attentive towards people that were experiencing homelessness prior to COVID. But I think that the longer a person experiences homelessness, the more complex their issues become. And we have a real opportunity to dive in head first with our new folks coming into homelessness and prevent them from being traumatized and falling into some of the other situations that make it very hard to get back out. So when we're talking about rapid rehousing for COVID-related homelessness, I don't have figures on that. I continue to defer to the wisdom of AEDC, who says we're losing 11,000 jobs in Anchorage this year by the end of 2020. That's AEDC's conservative projections. So if I think of that job loss, and I think of the realities that Anchorage prior to COVID had 20,000 households that we would consider severely rent burdened, meaning that they were spending somewhere above 30%, most of the time above 50% of their income on rent. It's those folks losing their jobs or losing one of their jobs or one of their spousal jobs. It's those folks that I think this new rapid rehousing money can target to get those folks stabilized again. But to more directly answer your question, Assemblymember Zalatel, prior to COVID, we needed approximately 1,500 rapid rehousing beds for our adults, and we needed about another 200 for our youth and family households. And we define family households as people with dependent children in their physical custody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to say I really respect what Ms. Boyle is saying, and it's certainly, I think, why this assembly dedicated $23 million to rental and mortgage relief, because the best way to prevent homelessness or to end homelessness is to prevent people from falling into homelessness at all. So hopefully folks are now starting to take advantage. I know they are having conversations with the administration, really taking advantage of those funds that are available to for rental and mortgage relief. I have one question for Jasmine and then another question for the administration. So Ms. Boyle, when we say rapid rehousing and we're connecting these families very quickly, can you describe sort of what the bottleneck is? What practically speaking is the hardest part of that? And I know it's going to take a number of weeks to get this money deployed, but what is sort of the hardest part of getting that money deployed? And then for the administration, I just wanted to ask about, I'll wait for Ms. Boyle to answer and then I'll ask that question.
Thank you, Assemblymember Dunbar. I think that in the new world of homelessness, as relates to COVID and as relates to the folks at Sullivan and some of our other large shelters, item one is connecting with people that maybe are newer to homelessness and less high acuity in their needs. We really want to pick the folks that can get back on their feet as quickly as possible and get them connected to landlords. There's already work in play around some business development with landlords, find out who has vacancies, who's willing to perhaps mitigate an eviction or certainly the impacts of COVID. But it's really the centralization of the process that I think slows us down, is that there needs to be somebody leading this work, whether it's a provider, whether it's somebody from the city, but somebody needs to connect the dots in a matchmaking process. We have 4 rapid rehousing providers in the community. Covenant House does this work for youth and young adults. Awake does this work for survivors of domestic violence, and certainly Catholic Social Services does this work for veterans and for a larger population. But I think we need to centralize. And again, my urgency is, how do we decompress Sullivan? And if we can do it at Sullivan, our other shelter locations, so that we can take in more people in those shelters, but also prevent the spread of COVID in a congregate care sheltering by moving people that are already employed or that have quick employment and can take over rental payments on their own, because that's the sort of underlying piece of rapid rehousing. Is it's a short-term intervention. The idea of rapid rehousing is we help you get connected to a landlord, we help you get your lease set up and get moved into an apartment, but that you quickly begin to take over the rent on your own so that this can be a sustainable place for you to live. It's a pretty high touch but rapid intervention. So I really do think it's the coordination that is the only thing that is going to slow us down in the immediate future.
Thank you, Ms. Boyle. So then for the administration, who do you envision doing that coordination? And then also, we received during the last week, I know my colleagues and I received a lot of suggestions about, could we use the Egan? Could we use the Nina Center? Could we use the Northway Mall? And I suppose with those 3 specifically, I'd love to hear Mr. Schuete's thoughts on, I know they were evaluated. Are they appropriate sites for any of this work? And then finally, where are we now people who have been infected with COVID-19 or the coronavirus, where are they being housed now? I know it's not at the shelter, obviously. What are we doing to prevent further infection? Thank you.
Through the chair, I'll take part of the question and then hand it over to Mr. Boeke for the second half. So to the first part of your question, are we currently evaluating additional congregate shelter facilities? And I think the short answer is no, not yet. And whether any other congregate shelter facility could be needed in the future will have to be evaluated as the demand peaks up. But unfortunately, only one of the facilities, I'm sorry, I think if I recall the list of properties you just listed, only one of those is owned by the municipality. The others are privately owned.
It was the Egan Center, the Denina Center, and the Northway Mall. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Other way around then. One of those properties, the Northway Mall, is a privately owned property and is not available to the municipality. The two convention centers, yes, you are correct. There was an extensive due diligence process prior to even standing up the Sullivan Mass Shelter site way back in the early days of COVID, which seemed like a lifetime ago. Through that due diligence process, there were a number of public and frankly private facilities that were evaluated and looked at for use as either a mass shelter or a congregate shelter or a mass isolation or quarantine facility, which is what Dempsey was used for. And both of the facilities that you listed were on that list, but for various reasons did not meet the needs of either option, whether it was mass shelter or mass quarantine. So that's why they were not considered, and they likely would not be considered if we ever got to a position where we're looking at mass congregate shelter. And I'll let Mr. Boeke pick up where I left off.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And I think the Assemblymember Dunbar, I think you hit the exact question that we are spending a lot of time on, trying to figure out how do we set this up in a way that allows for that much needed coordination. I will say that there were a number of meetings over this weekend. We have a couple of more set up today that I know Jasmine will probably be involved in a number of those going forward as well, but we have meetings set up with the health department, some different providers to figure out how we can, set this program up for success going forward so that we don't have those coordination issues. So certainly a lot more to come here in the coming days, but that is definitely top of mind right now as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just kind of wanted to elaborate a little bit, or have the administration elaborate a little bit on the potential for other sites, whether they're owned or privately owned, muni-owned or privately owned, and getting at a little bit more about the potential for the Northway Mall. Because we're having to do this because of COVID, in other words, we have to have more space so that people have that 6-foot distancing. So a lot of what we're doing right now in terms of our decisions for what to do for homeless housing is basically being driven by the health requirements to combat COVID. So, but with that in mind, obviously, I'm thinking that anything we would choose to do, whether it would be muni-owned or privately owned, would be an available use of COVID funding. So I guess my question is, because something is privately owned, that doesn't necessarily take leasing a facility like that off the table, does it? Or has the administration already decided that it's not going to investigate privately owned? So anyway, question on kind of a little bit more on the specifics about the potential for Northway Mall. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So through the chair, Assemblymember Kennedy, there was a portion of the Northway Mall that was looked at in the early stages of mobilizing our emergency response to COVID, specific to the need for mass isolation, mass quarantine. And in that particular instance, we were looking at leasing a vacant portion of the mall specific to that function. However, because of the bankruptcy status of the mall, we were unable to reach an agreeable lease term with the property owner. They were not particularly interested in leasing to us for the function that we were requesting. So I don't know if that has changed, but as far as renting or leasing space, that's certainly an option throughout all of our emergency responses, and one that could be available for privately owned property down the road. But as of today, I don't believe that the EOC has Northway Mall on its radar for any of the types of emergency responses we may need.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schutte. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you to Mr. Schutte. What are some of the drawbacks of that giant building, the Northway Mall?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Constant, can you be more specific?
Yeah, everybody draws a line to, oh, that's a perfect solution for all of our problems, but the building actually has some problems that are not conducive to affordability and functionality for these uses. And so do you have any of that information available?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair, Assemblymember Constant. The building itself is in some need of major repair and restoration work in order to make it useful for any extended period of time. The last estimate that I saw on the needed roof repairs was essentially a roof replacement in the multi-million-dollar range. The building itself is somewhat would be somewhat challenging to work with, given it's designed as a mall with large hallway spaces and other sort of gathering spaces, and then individualized suites. It's big. It's really, really big. And so it's probably far exceeds any potential need that could ever fill the space. And then lastly, let's keep in mind that while the mall structure itself and the underlying land is going up for sale, there are a number of fragment parcels that have operating and viable businesses on them that would need to be taken into account for planning purposes, for any sort of use like congregate shelter, et cetera. And then lastly, it's somewhat, I think, somewhat overbuilt for parking. And so if you were to assume this structure and use it for congregate shelter, you would also absorb significant land portions that are used for parking right now that would be unneeded and unusable, and so kind of would be not the highest and best use for that property.
Needless to say, all the costs of just keeping that vacuum of space or that huge empty space hot or warm, it's impossible to keep warm. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Allard?
Thank you. Mr. Schutte, in regards to what you were saying, so technically this, but are you saying, I have a few questions. So over at the Northway Mall, it could technically house everyone versus having 4 separate buildings that are directly impacting neighborhoods, correct?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Allard, the total square footage available at the Northway Mall would be significantly greater than the square footage currently being proposed for the transitional living treatment center and day shelter. So it's more than would be needed.
So, but we could transform that into a space that would allow an all one-stop shop, because right now, don't we use the Sullivan Arena to bring folks in to take care of their paperwork, birth certificates, and other items, which will lead me to believe this is something that we actually probably need to look more into, because if we actually have 1,200 homeless, or I think 1,164, we might be able to use it as the domiciliary, where they have a one-stop shop. So they have the rehabilitation center for drug addiction and alcohol, And then we also have where doctors are there, therapists are there, they take care of their paperwork, they have a cafeteria. So I really would like to encourage the assembly and to consider this space and to do due diligence and to research it before we just shut it down completely. And it's not impacting neighborhoods. It's a very good location, and I think we need to reevaluate this more. And if you have any other input on it, Mr. Schutte, I'm more than happy to hear it.
Absolutely, yes. Through the chair, Assemblymember Allard. In addition to being extremely large, I didn't go through the extensive list of needed upgrades and remodels that are I guess, repairs that are required. I already mentioned the roof, but there's about another $12 million required for upgrades and repairs to the facility. It was included as part of the due diligence in looking at sites that could be acceptable for the suite of homeless services that you just described. And unfortunately, because of the extremely high price tag associated with bringing the facility up to code and repairing some of the deterioration that has occurred over the years because of lack of investment, that price tag alone was almost $15 million, and that very quickly disqualified this as a viable location.
Chair, can I have a follow-up, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So, Mr. Schutte, during the testimony on AO 2020-66, we had several structural engineers, architects, and real estate agents, and I actually got some expert opinions on that too. With the 4 buildings, I think we all need to consider that the reconstruction, whether it's the sprinkler system over at the Alaska Club and other locations, they were pushing the number about 20 million. Of repairs and bringing everything up to code. So if you're going on record saying that the buildings that we are going to be doing is going to be significantly less in the remodeling, then that's great. Do I believe that? I don't. And I think that we as a community need to come together, and especially the assembly, and do due diligence again to get a price estimate, because I don't believe what you're telling me is actually completely accurate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'd like to see if we can wrap things up pretty quickly. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I was prepared to give the benefit of the doubt to the previous member who spoke when she suggested that this project at the Northway Mall wouldn't affect a neighborhood. But then the member went on to double down and message that this will not affect people in neighborhoods. No, it will not affect people in wealthy white neighborhoods, but it for sure will affect people who are living close to the poverty line and who surround that facility. There are at least 6 neighborhoods. So while many people in this community continue to believe that around the 3rd Avenue properties aren't a neighborhood, or around the Northway Mall are not a neighborhood, those are neighborhoods. Those are people. They deserve equal consideration.
Thank you. All right, so I really don't want to have this discussion all over again. And so, like I said, I really want to wrap this up. Mr. Dunbar?
Chair, I want to say one thing on the record. Mr. Constant needs to bite his tongue to reference wealthy white people.
Miss Allard, you're out of order. I'm happy to go to you after I'm done with Mr. Dunbar. Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was going to make a note as Mr. Constant did. I represent a couple of neighborhoods around the Northway Mall. I have spoken with Mr. Schutte about this location before, and I do think that the costs are prohibitive. I mean, to purchase the building, to repair the building, for a variety of reasons, it's a lot cheaper to turn hotels into housing than it is giant retail spaces into housing, especially when they have such a damaged roof. But I was hoping that we could perhaps, with the remaining time, hear from some folks who might have called in from the hockey community or anyone else. Is that possible, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, we could do that. We can have some closing comments if either Mr. Kohlberg has any closing comments, or if any representative from the figure skating community has some closing comments.
Mr. Chair, I was also going to say, I think there might be community members who have called in, and I don't know if they were able to also speak, if we have time.
Very briefly, sure. So I'll first open it up to Mr. Kohlberg.
Thank you, sir. I agree with Mr. Dunbar to hear any comments from people that have called in. We have nothing else to say on our side.
Okay, so for folks on the phone, if you are muted, it's *6 to unmute yourself, and then so if anyone would like to speak, it's *6 to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and I'm happy to recognize you.
Hello.
Hi, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dana Hubbard. I was born and raised in Anchorage, and I'd like to thank the two assembly members. I emailed in last week about the use of Ben Boeke and some how the COVID money is being spent, and I'd like to thank Austin Quinn Davidson and Forrest Dunbar for their dialogue. This, I believe, my question is for Mr. Schutte. So one of the questions I have and would really like clarification on is why the Denina Center and the Egan Center are not being able to be used for facilities for the homeless at this time. It seems to me with the current ordinances in place, you can't have large gatherings more than 15, 30 people. We're not even allowed to dance. Kind of feels like Footloose. So these facilities are sitting vacant, not generating revenue, whereas if we were able to open up the Sullivan Arena again, we could, to be used for ice for the kids and the adults. You know, last year, the Alaska State Hockey Association put on some fun days for the kids there, and they were able to use the facility and skate where the Aces used to skate, and it was great to be there as a community member watching them. And so I guess that's one of the things I think about down the road. Not only is it a revenue opportunity for this city, but it's a community opportunity. And I know, you know, from U6 kids to Old Man Beer League play there. And so it'd be great to have all of the ice back. And one of the things that this city really lacks is ice for the entire community to use. So if you could just provide clarification why we can't use the Egan and the Denina, and then also open up the Sullivan Arena for the community use.
Sure, through the chair to the caller, this is Chris Schutte. I'm thrilled that somebody else is making Footloose comparisons, one of my favorite movies. So the Sullivan Arena, the Denina Center and Egan Center were evaluated as a congregate shelter site, and there are a couple of reasons why neither facility works very well. I think the first one, which is ironic in a way, is that because Sullivan and Boeke and Dempsey, when it was used, are designed to be provide locker rooms, are designed to provide that kind of amenity. That's something that's needed for the shelter sites, access to large banks of showers and bathrooms, et cetera. So all of the things that make the Sullivan and Boeke and others work as sports facilities was also one of the items that took the Denina and the Egan off the list because they don't have any shower capacity at all. Secondly, both facilities are multi-story, multi-floor. It does make it more challenging to manage space on a multi-level, multi-floor facility. Both the Denina and Egan are not as hardened, I guess is the way I would describe it, as either Boeke or Sullivan. Both of those facilities, as you probably know firsthand, are very industrial, very concrete, very easy to maintain and clean, et cetera. There's no carpet, et cetera, that would need to be sanitized, things like that. It gets a lot more challenging and costly to maintain a indoor facility like Denina and Egan in that environment. And then lastly, there is an assembly resolution that requests that homeless facilities and homeless services be located in areas across town and not concentrated in downtown Anchorage. And so that also was a detriment to using Egan or Denina. But that's both those facilities were certainly looked at. And, you know, depending on the the need could be mobilized for some use like that in the future, provided there was the need if the emergency took a turn for the worse, which we all are hoping it will not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name's Clint Lancaster. I was going to speak too if we still had
Go
enough
ahead.
time. Hey, I'm just calling in. I just been watching this situation. I'm a parent, a hockey parent in town. Also, I just wanted to really thank you guys for giving us back that rink to use for the kids. I think the thing it doesn't seem like it's been lost, but I think it deserves to be reiterated is that these kids and the people that are using these facilities, there's been a lot of loss this year for our kids. They're the things that they've all looked forward to. Certainly summer vacations have been lost. Going back to school with their friends have been lost. I can tell you from my two sons that play hockey, they're very much looking forward to playing hockey, and the news about the potential to not be able to play hockey or to not play as much hockey and use the ice that they do. And they don't just play hockey. And understand it's not just the hockey community that's affected by this. It's everybody that uses those facilities in our town. It really, really was another just sort of blow. And I know that that's not something that is anybody on this, COVID's not anybody that's on this call's fault, but certainly the outcome could have been worse. So I appreciate that you guys looked at this. I appreciate that the folks that came out and talked to us that when we protested, it's been a good experience for my kids. But it's also good to see the outcome that it is. So I just wanted to say, I appreciate that you guys gave us back that rink to use. Kids can have some little bit of normalcy put back into their lives, and certainly enjoy being part of the conversation to address the other issue, which is homeless. And I think it's important to know that it was never a discussion about us versus our use versus the homeless use. I think everybody wants the best outcome for all this. I think this is a first very good positive step, and looking forward to working on it the rest of the way. So I just wanted to say thanks for that, and that was it.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'll be extremely brief. Eugene Haberman, live in the Metro Valley, follow the public process and so forth. My question to you is a simple thing is, with the mayor's order opening up the bars and restaurants for certain percentages, it's also noted the worship percentages too. It also noted political. What's the story with the Anchorage Assembly meeting tonight? Are you open for the public to be in that room? One would think that would be tied together. What's the story? With all due respect. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm happy to entertain that question. Although, if you could mute yourself, Mr. Haberman, please.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm happy to entertain that question, even though it really isn't germane to the topic that we have before us. So a press release was sent out in the middle of this work session outlining how the chambers will be reopened today. So yes, in a limited capacity, the chambers are reopened today, and that information is available. Okay, so is there anyone else who would like to speak on the topic we have before us? All right, hearing no one, then I really want to thank the administration, the Anchorage Hockey Association, and the figure skating organizations, as well as the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness for joining us and talking through these issues. So thanks, everyone. Have a good day. And Assembly members, I will see you at 5 p.m.